Hi, it's Margaret. It is getting a little bit chilly out. Now it is starting to feel like fall. But good news is we have not had a frost yet. So the dahlias right behind me are still going strong. So I thought I would do my intro out here before heading over to the garage. And why I'm heading over to the garage is because today I'm going to talk about my onion harvest. So I do have some footage of when I harvested all my onions back in mid-September, and now it's time for me to pack them all up, and I will show you how I store them inside so that they essentially last several months, until early spring usually. So why don't we head on over to the garage?
So here they are on the rack. They're still a little bit dirty. I'll be cleaning off the top layer of skins here before I put them away. But before I get to telling you each of the different varieties I grew, there are 9 different varieties that I grew this year. I am going to take you back to September when these were first harvested. So here we are, and it is mid-September, September the 16th to be exact, and that is the day that I harvested my onions this year. Now you'll notice that the bed is covered with netting, otherwise I have big issues with leek moth. It lays its eggs on the onion foliage and then they hatch and the grub tunnels into the onion, and in most cases it doesn't cause a huge amount of damage to the onion itself, but what it does is it usually impacts how long the onions store for. So the best way I have found to keep the leek moths out of the onions is to cover it with netting. Now you'll notice that the majority of onions leaves have died all the way back. And this is actually something that I've been doing in the last few years, which is delaying my harvest by a few weeks. In the past, I harvested my onions about a week or two after the foliage started to fall over. And this was usually in the mid to end of August range. It would still be basically green, most of the foliage, and I would pull them up after, as I said, the foliage fell over, they sat in the bed for a week or two. I would pull them up and then I would cure them. Then one year what happened is I didn't get around to it, and I didn't end up harvesting the onions until mid-September, and they essentially looked like what they look like now, where a lot of the leaves had died all the way back. And I was a little bit concerned that they would end up not storing that well. But what happened was actually the exact opposite. They stored better than usual. So I've been doing this late harvesting ever since, and it's worked out pretty well. I grew 9 different varieties of onions. I grew 7 that are storage onions and 2 that are sweet onions, they're called, and they generally don't store as long. Now, the onions that I'm growing are what's considered long day varieties. The difference between long day varieties and short day varieties, it all has to do with how long your days are during the summer, because it's the day length that will trigger the onions to start to bulb up. And long day varieties are grown in the north, where our days are much longer during the summer, in the 14, 15, 16 hour range, whereas short day varieties are grown in the south because they only need 10 or 11 hours to trigger bulb formation, and that's essentially how long their daylight hours are during the summer. Now, there's also day neutral or intermediate day onions, and these are kind of middle of the road. They will form a good sized bulb no matter where you live, either north or south, but they do the best where you have kind of a mid-range in terms of daylight hours in the 12 to 14 hour range. So if you've tried onions before and they haven't bulbed up for you, one reason may be that you purchased the wrong variety for your area. When I seeded my onions in the spring, I purposely seeded a lot more than I knew I would need for the bed. And the reason I did that was because you never know how your germination's going to be, and I would rather have a few more to deal with than not enough, which is actually something that happened a couple of years ago. Now, what I decided to do with the extras was plant them along one side of the bed. I didn't do anything to them. They were in the cell packs, all squished together. I just kind of shoved them up against the side of the bed, and my plan was that I would use those as green onions throughout the summer, which I did. I figured by the end of the summer, I'd probably have these marble size onions in that area that would essentially end up in the compost. But that's actually not what happened. The onions sized up quite a lot more than I thought they would, where I would say most of them were larger than pearl onions. And so because of that, I ended up harvesting them as well. As I'm harvesting each variety, instead of having 9 different buckets, I just have 5 buckets, and I'm putting a red variety and a yellow variety into each bucket, and I'm putting the tags in there as well. Now, I built this DIY rack almost 10 years ago. It's simple, it's inexpensive, and it's effective. And it stores really easily as well. The rack itself hangs on the wall on a couple of hooks. And then what I did is above those, I have other hooks that I put things that I use throughout the season, like hoses and shovels and that kind of stuff, which just basically lays on top of it. And the rack, though, is big enough to hold an entire harvest of onions and garlic. This year, I did cut back a bit on the number of onions we grew by about 2 or 3 dozen, as I found that we just don't need as many as we used to, especially now that my son's in university. Now, what I do as I lay out the onions is I will spread them out. I don't smush them up against each other. I leave a little bit of airspace around all of the onions, and the leaves are hanging down underneath the rack. And I will usually leave them here in the garage for a good 3 to 4 weeks. But even 2 weeks is usually fine, so long as the temperature is relatively warm. The cooler the temperature is, the longer the onions take to fully dry out and to cure. So here we are back in present day, and everything is cured. When I harvested the onions, I actually did bring each variety up to the camera just to show you guys what each of them looked like, but it ended up not being focused. So I'm just going to quickly run through each of the ones that I grew. All of them except for 2 are storage varieties. So I'll do those first. Let's just go like this, because we want to see the beauty of these here. This one here is Blush. This one is Cortland. This one here is a flat one, and it is Brunswick. This one is Cartier. This one here is Red Wing. This one is Talon. Here is Red Mountain. And I grew 2 sweet varieties of onions. This one is Ailsa Craig, and it does look like a big onion, but it is actually quite small compared to the ones that I've grown in the past. Some of these get really, really big. And here is the last sweet onion, and this one is Spanish Medallion. I added this one to my grow list last year, and I really quite liked it. It's stored pretty well too. The sweet ones tend to store about 2 to 3 months, whereas the storage varieties will store a lot longer than that, often until April or sometimes even May. And here are all those really little onions that I grew for green onions, and then I just left them in the bed. And they're actually coming in quite handy because I have grabbed quite a few of these already, just when I need like a little bit of onion for an omelet or something like that. I am going to end up using these up, even though it wasn't part of the original plan. So what I'm probably going to do is just clean all these up and put them in a little basket in the kitchen and just use them up over the next couple of months. And now to my super high-tech method of storing my onions. And all you need is this. This is basically the lid of a box, I think. You need something that's shallow and that will allow you to put your onions in so that they're not really piled up high on top of each other. I don't layer them usually any more than 1 or 2 layers deep. So to prep them for storage, it's really super easy. All I do basically is get rid of any dirt and any loose kind of leaves on the outside. I cut this bit here like that. If I have big roots, I'll cut those off as well. And that's it. And then I just plop it in the box. Depending on how many of a particular variety I have, I either use one box for one variety, or I will do a red and a yellow variety in one box. And because they're red and yellow, I just put the 2 tags in there, so I'll be able to tell which is which. So for this, I'm actually going to only do the Cartier because I do have quite a few in here. I'm just going to get these prepped, and then we're going to go into my basement and I'll show you where I store them. One thing I forgot to mention actually is the sign that these are ready to go into storage. And that is when these stems here are absolutely totally dried out. So if you cut them, I usually cut them just a little bit above the onion. This is all, this area here, I don't know how easy that is to see, is all very papery. If it is succulent at all, like a little bit juicy, that kind of thing, then they would not be ready to go into storage. They have to be completely dried out. So the other thing is we have a couple of onions here. This is a Spanish medallion that bolted. So you can see here the stem, boom, boom, boom. These will not store well, so I'm just going to cut this off, and you can see the difference here. It's almost spongy in there. And these will go right into the kitchen because these will only store maybe 2 or 3 weeks. Okay, so here we are. I actually did not have many of the Red Mountain here, so I decided to put both of these in one box just to save space in the basement. So let's go downstairs and I'll show you where I put these. Okay, and here we are in my basement. This is the floor. I have a set of shelves. This is where a lot of my gardening stuff and everything goes. So underneath this shelf is where the onions go. So I will put them under there like that. And also a note that when I run out of boxes, I sometimes use paper bags like this. As long as they have the ability to breathe as well, don't pile them up too much, like maybe only up to like here. So the basement stays at around 18, 19 degrees or so, and that's a year-round temperature. Perfect for the onions. And in addition to that, it's fairly dark down there because we really don't go down there that often. This is our unfinished part of the basement. And there are grow lights down there, but the shelves that are kind of where the onions are shading them from any direct light from the grow lights. So if you have never grown onions before, I really encourage you to try it. Even if it's only a couple of square feet, you grow like a couple of, I don't know, the equivalent of 2 bags of onions or something like that. It's really surprising for such a humble vegetable how satisfying it is to grow. And I have a feeling if you've never tried it and you did, you would probably be hooked as well. Anyhow, thank you so much for joining me today, and we'll see you next time. Bye.